So one of the sources you shared paints this really vivid picture, right? It talks about dusk settling on Alcamzar, this city on Tezwa. Crimson sunlight, steel gray clouds, wind howling through ruined buildings.
Yeah, it sets a grim scene immediately.
It really does.
Yeah.
And right away, you're dropped into this world of just chaos, destruction, intense human tragedy.
Hmm.
This isn't just a planet needing aid. It's drowning in conflict. Starfleet's there trying to help, but it's way more complicated than just handing out relief supplies.
Absolutely. They run into unexpected enemies, the stakes are incredibly high, and there's this whole layer of deception unfolding.
Exactly. So today we're going to take a deep dive into this collection of sources you sent over these reports, personal logs, official records, and try to piece together what actually happened on Tezwa.
Right, try to get past the surface level.
Our mission basically is to pull out the key information, figure out the truth behind the confusion, and really understand the consequences for everyone caught up in it. So let's unpack this.
Okay, well, the initial picture from these sources is incredibly bleak. You've got Alcamzar weeks after that Klingon torpedo strike shockwave hit. It's still reeling.
And Starfleet's immediate focus is just basic survival.
Pretty much food, water, shelter, basic medical care. The engineers are starting to arrive too, supposed to begin the rebuilding process.
But the sources make it clear pretty fast that rebuilding isn't happening anytime soon. There's an immediate active threat. What do the reports say about that?
They show just how indiscriminate the enemy was. Loyalists, followers of the old Prime Minister Kinchon, they start attacking right away.
And they weren't picky about targets.
Not at all. Starfleet security, sure,
Yeah.
but also unarmed medics, the engineers who were there to help rebuild, even local Tezwan police and civilians.
Yeah.
Anyone seen as connected to the relief effort or the new government was a target.
That sounds actually terrifying. There's one specific story in there from Ensign Fiona McEwen that just seems to capture the sheer horror of it all.
Yeah, that one's rough. She sees a Tezwan singer just jump from a tower, commit suicide right in front of people waiting for food rations.
People are out.
They just keep waiting. The source describes it as numb indifference. For McEwen, seeing that kind of disregard for life was deeply unsettling. It really speaks volumes about the level of trauma the population was already enduring.
And it wasn't just the violence. What about the physical environment itself?
Also hostile, the sources mention things like acid rain falling and these huge craters all over the place from where artillery pieces were destroyed back in the initial conflict.
And there's this political and ethnic tension simmering underneath everything too, right?
But definitely, a clear split. You've got the Alinine people, mostly linked to the Lacom Coalition, and the Trine, generally with the Gatney Party, which is led by the new Prime Minister, Belloc.
And that affected the attacks.
Seems like it. The reports mention different patterns. Attacks in Alinine cities were frequent, but the sources say attacks in Trina cities were often bolder, deadlier. So that ethnic division just adds another layer of complexity for Starfleet trying to navigate this mess.
Okay, so amidst all this chaos, suffering, constant danger, investigations start kicking off. But there's this growing sense of unease. Geordie LaForge is down there with engineering teams, right?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out where that destroyed artillery came from.
He is searching those craters you mentioned.
And finding.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The sources say he checked dozens of them, all dead ends. It's like this advanced artillery just materialized and then vanished. A real mystery at the heart of it all.
And on top of that mystery, there's an even bigger one looming over the Enterprise crew. Commander Riker is missing.
That's right. 17 days he's been gone. In silence. No contact, no demands from any captors.
That silence must have been terrifying.
It generated huge amounts of fear, uncertainty. Picard, the sources say, was deeply worried, feeling echoes of past fears about losing Riker. It got serious enough that Admiral Janeway actually gave Picard a deadline.
A Kisline.
Yeah, find Riker by a certain point, or she'd have to appoint a new captain for the USS Titan the command Riker was supposed to take.
Wow. So intense pressure. Meanwhile, other operations are still happening on the ground. We get these little glimpses, like a Tezwan recruit named Tanila experiencing the transporter for the first time.
Yeah, the source describes her reaction. She calls it a paralyzing, smothering embrace. Gives you a sense of how alien even basic Federation tech could feel.
And another account shows the stark reality versus the mission's intent, right?
Yeah.
Starfleet relief workers having to deal with desperate refugees.
Sprinting away from this massive wall of starving, filthy Tezwan refugees, as the source puts it. It got so bad an away team actually had to form a firing line, fire warning shots, just to slow them down.
Shows how easily the relief mission could just turn into crowd control.
Exactly, managing overwhelming desperation.
Then there's Lieutenant Vale. She's training local Tezwan police recruits.
Yes, and the sources point out something interesting. The recruits seem to have a good handle on community policing, diplomatic stuff.
But not the tactical side.
Right. They struggle with the tactical training, the actual survival skills needed in that kind of combat zone.
Yeah.
So Vale's job is critical. She's drilling them on paying attention to details, spotting hidden explosives, that kind of thing. Her mantra was, the devil is in the details.
Practical, life-saving stuff for that environment.
Absolutely crucial.
And while all this is happening on the ground, we start seeing hints of trouble higher up. Ambassador Lagon, the Federation ambassador there, she's interacting with LaForge's teams.
She is, and LaForge has major concerns. He flags her work orders, describes them as seeming incompetent or malicious.
Malicious, that's strong.
It is, and it's important because it suggests the problems Starfleet's facing might not just be external from the Loyalists. There could be issues, maybe deliberate sabotage coming from within the Federation's own setup on Tezwa.
Raises the question, is someone actively trying to hinder the relief effort?
It definitely puts that possibility on the table.
So as these investigations continue, they start to get a clearer picture of the opponent, General Minza, and the stakes just keep rising.
Right. Lieutenant Vale and Lieutenant Pert get tasked with finding General Biro Minza. He's Kinshon's right-hand man. They use intercepted, decrypted transmissions to track him down.
And they plan the capture carefully.
Very. They opted for a diversion instead of a direct assault specifically to avoid civilian casualties. The mission was a success. They nabbed Minza, confirmed his ID with a DNA scan.
So Minza gets taken back to the Enterprise. Interrogation time? Troy's handling that.
Primarily, yes. Using psychological tactics, replicating his native food, interrupting his sleep patterns. There's also a brief mention of Commander Valentin giving him a hard time in the brig.
What's Minza's reaction to all this?
That's what's revealing. He's defiant, smug even. Troy's not breaking him easily. And he starts dropping these hints about knowing secrets. Secrets that could, quote, shake your Federation to the core.
So he thinks he has leverage.
Clearly. He's not just some captured soldier. He believes he holds dangerous information.
And while he's being interrogated, the situation outside just keeps getting worse. That attack on the Federation Admin Center in Dolatava, hundreds killed. The sources link that directly to the Riker search, don't they?
They do. It's framed as payback, a direct warning related to Picard pushing harder and harder to find Riker. It shows how interconnected everything was, becoming the personal search, bleeding into the wider conflict.
The enemy is definitely hitting back.
Responding very directly to Starfleet's actions.
And then there's this other thread that pops up.
Yeah.
About contraband. Smuggled onto Tezwa.
Yeah, through unofficial channels. Names like Azernal and Quafina are mentioned. Initially, there are hints, maybe misdirection, about Tholian involvement.
What does that suggest?
It introduces this idea of a shadow network, operating outside the lines, possibly fueling the conflict or working towards some other hidden goal. Just adds another layer of complexity, you know?
It feels like things are just spiraling now, utterly disastrously. The Loyalist attacks ramp up even more.
Brutally. It goes beyond ground ambushes. They start shooting down shuttlecraft.
Seriously?
Yeah. Things get so tense, the sources even mention Starfleet security detaining a journalist to stop tactical information from leaking out. Shows the extreme pressure they were under.
And for the medical teams,
Yeah.
What was the reality like for them? Dr. Crusher?
Horrific. Crusher's setting up a medical facility, but she's just overwhelmed by the sheer volume of trauma. The sources describe the constant smell of death and sewage.
Grim.
And having armed guards constantly present, even in the medical bay, that really highlights the pervasive danger. It clearly took a toll. Another doctor, Hughes, apparently just wanted out, sick of being around guns all the time.
Gives you a real sense of the psychological weight.
Definitely.
Mhm.
And then comes the Odina K disaster.
Ah, yes. Lieutenant Pert, leading a big special ops team.
Right. They're waiting for some technical adjustments, preparing for an operation, and then just boom, a massive explosion.
The casualties were huge, weren't they?
Devastating. Over 100 Starfleet personnel killed instantly. Only 14 managed to get beamed out in time.
Oh my God.
The sources capture Pert's reaction, just profound guilt, shame, feeling like he walked his team straight into a death trap.
And that one incident basically doubled their casualties overnight.
More than doubled them, yeah. It hammered home just how capable the enemy was of inflicting mass casualties, and that even large planned operations were incredibly vulnerable.
And this wasn't just one bad day. The attacks were everywhere.
Planet-wide, it seems. Reports flooding and personnel taking fire in every major city, hospitals getting hit, casualties just climbing and climbing. The sources use the phrase spinning disastrously out of control.
Even just moving around was deadly. That runabout crash.
The Tunguska, yeah. Carrying personnel like Fillion and Ensign McEwen we mentioned earlier crashes in Alcazar. They survive the crash but are trapped in the wreckage, having to fight off approaching Tezwans.
Just highlights how basic transport became a life-or-death gamble.
Absolutely, nowhere felt safe.
And the danger even reached the Enterprise, in orbit.
It did. Hijacked cargo shuttles used as suicide attackers aimed right at the ship.
How did they handle that?
Well, this is where Data comes in. Apparently, he'd predicted this exact type of threat weeks before. He'd been drilling the crew relentlessly on countermeasures.
Wow, so they were ready.
As ready as they could be. Picard had to order phasers fired, but at reduced power, to disable the shuttles without killing the pilots inside. It's the stark contrast, you know? Absolute chaos down on the planet versus this disciplined, almost clinical defense orchestrated by Data up in orbit.
While all that's going on, the sources also give us a peek inside the Tezwan government itself. Internal politics.
Right. Prime Minister Billock and his deputy, Tonakal, they're apparently having urgent discussions about destroying communication relays.
Why?
To stop Kinchon, the deposed leader, from broadcasting. It suggests they were just as worried about what Kinchon might say or incite among the population. Adds another political dimension Starfleet's stuck in the middle of.
Okay, let's circle back to Riker. He's still in captivity, things sound grim, but then there's a twist involving a Tezwan general, Yalon.
Yes, a really surprising turn. General Yalon visits Riker. He gives him a data rod, warns him Kinchon plans to execute him.
Gives him a data rod, why?
The sources don't make his full motives crystal clear, but his actions are decisive. During an attack on the facility where Riker's held, Yalon helps him escape. He actually sacrifices himself, covering Riker's retreat.
So Yalon is key. He gets Riker out, and Riker has this data rod.
Exactly. Riker's wounded on the run through this devastated city, clutching that vital piece of information.
And this is where Lieutenant Vale's training connects back in, right?
Yeah.
With the recruit, Tanila.
Tragically, yes. Tanila, one of the recruits Vale trained to notice details, spots Riker being attacked by loyalists.
And she steps in.
She does. Intervenes heroically, gets Riker to safety. The sources strongly imply this is when she transfers the data rod to him, make sure he has it. But then, she's killed in the firefight.
Oh, man.
Riker later reports flat out, she saved his life, her courage, her training. It changed everything, but cost her everything.
For sacrifice, though, becomes the key to unlocking the whole thing.
It really does. Riker gets rescued, brings back the data rod. Pert and Data analyze it. It doesn't just pinpoint Kinchon's location.
But contains something else.
Yes. Critically, it holds information about the location of those contraband shipments we talked about earlier.
Ah, connecting back to that subplot.
Directly. The info on the rod links up with impounded freighters like the Kadera. Remember, it was found adrift, logs intact, crew gone after a supposed mutiny. Logs from ships like that tracked the contraband's movement.
And the data rod confirms where the weapons really came from.
This is the bombshell. The analysis confirms the advanced weapon components weren't from the Tholians or some other outside enemy like Azrael's plot initially suggested.
Well, where did they come from?
They were manufactured on Earth, picked up at Deneva. Paid for by an Antidine who was then conveniently murdered by one of the Kadera's crew members.
Wait, manufactured on Earth within the Federation?
Exactly. The weapons causing all this death and destruction on Tezwa, they originated from inside the Federation itself.
That's staggering. And the cover-up must have been extensive.
It was. When Starfleet started looking for evidence based on the data rod, they found mashing components, even in locations linked to Prime Minister Billock's Gatney party.
Bullock, the current prime minister.
His people actually fired on Starfleet teams searching for the contraband. It confirmed Lieutenant Vale's dawning horror. This conspiracy wasn't just Kinchon, it went way deeper, reaching into the current Tezwan leadership too.
So the whole conflict, it wasn't just a relief mission gone wrong, it was an internal Federation crisis playing out on Tezwa.
Precisely. With deep, corrupt roots right there on the planet.
Okay, so they've uncovered this monumental, incredibly dangerous truth. What happens then? How do they handle this?
It triggers a major reckoning, a very high-level meeting. You've got Picard, Ambassador Lagan, and a whole roster of Starfleet admirals. Nakamura, Nechayev, Paris, Jellicoe, Ross.
All the big names.
Yeah,
And they're discussing the conspiracy.
the full scope of it, involving Federation President Zeif himself, along with Ezernal and Quafina. The sources state clearly they were involved in arming Tezwa and deliberately provoking the Klingons.
Zeif, the president of the Federation,
Mhm.
involved in arming Tezwa and provoking the Klingons.
That's what the evidence pointed to.
The dilemma must have been immense. Zeif's actions are criminal, obviously,
Yeah.
but exposing it.
Would almost certainly ignite that war with the Klingons they'd just managed to avoid. If the Klingons found out the Federation secretly armed Tezwa against them, catastrophe.
So what's the debate? Jellicoe resisted?
Initially, yeah. The sources mention him arguing Starfleet answers to the government they don't have the authority to move against the president. But Lagan apparently countered, pointing out that Tezwans never would have dared challenge the Klingons if the Federation hadn't armed them in the first place. Zeif created the situation.
So the final decision.
It's extraordinary and, frankly, a massive violation of Federation principles. They decide Starfleet, despite being subordinate, will forcibly remove Zeif, Ezernal, and Quafina from power.
Forcibly remove the president.
Yes, keep them incommunicado. The justification recorded in the sources is that it was necessary for the Federation's survival. Exposing Zeif meant war, so they chose this, compromising their own laws to prevent a larger conflict.
And they buried it deep.
A vow was taken right there in that room. This discussion never happened. Sealed away. Top secret.
Wow. Okay. So the conspiracy is dealt with, secretly. But the sources then shift back to the personal impact, the human cost, for those who were actually there, who knew parts of this truth.
Yeah, the fallout is profound. Lieutenant Pert, for instance. He's wrestling with overwhelming guilt about Odina K, but also now carries the weight of this massive secret. He starts questioning everything, fearing for people he cares about.
And the doctors, Crusher and Hughes.
Still dealing with the aftermath, supporting each other through the trauma, trying to focus on saving the lives they can save, even amidst so much loss. The sources mention Hughes just breaking down at one point, overwhelmed by the sheer number of people dying.
In Lieutenant Vale, she revisits Tanila's memory.
She does. Visits her memory stone with the family. She reflects on Tanila's courage, calling her a peace officer. That term clearly means a lot to Vale. She tells Tanila's son his mother was incredibly brave because she kept her promise by being that peace officer.
There are personal moments for the senior staff, too. Picard and Crusher.
A quiet moment. Picard sees Hughes leaving Crusher's quarters. He realizes, sort of definitively, that whatever complex history they had, she's moved on. And he decides he needs to as well. A quiet acceptance.
And Riker, after his ordeal.
He's recovering, reuniting with Troy, but the experience changed him. He reflects on his career, realizes he'd gotten maybe too comfortable. Seeing Data's performance saving the ship makes him think his own comfort might have held Data back. He decides it's time for him to step up, take on the command, the responsibility he'd been putting off.
LaForge just sees the public news. Zeif resigning.
Right. He sees the official story, the cover-up. He knows some of the truth, not all of it, but the sources mention whispers are already spreading through the ship. People sense something bigger happened.
And Troy, dealing with Mince's execution.
That hits her hard. Minza gets executed by the Tezwans after being handed over. Troy finds herself grappling with the dark thoughts she had during his interrogation, the temptation to use harsher methods. She thinks about Nietzsche's warning, battle not with monsters, lest you become a monster. She feels like engaging with Minza's darkness tainted her somehow.
So underneath the official story of Zeif resigning, there's this hidden truth, known only by a few. And carrying that knowledge takes a huge personal toll.
A massive toll. It's a powerful and pretty unsettling place to leave the immediate events described in these sources.
Okay, so we've gone through this deep dive, pulling apart these sources you shared. We started, with the really visible stuff, the destruction on Tezwa, the danger, the suffering Starfleet walked into.
Right, the immediate crisis. But as we dug deeper into the reports, the personal stories, the logs, we uncovered these hidden layers.
Yeah, finding a conspiracy that wasn't about some external enemy, but rooted right inside the Federation leadership, actively arming Tezwa, provoking the Klingons. for their own reasons.
A shocking revelation, really.
Absolutely. And woven through all of it, every account, is just the immense human cost, lives lost, the trauma everyone endured, Starfleet, Tezwans, and then this heavy moral burden on the few who discovered the real truth and had to keep it secret.
It really shows, doesn't it? Even institutions built on high ideals, like the Federation, can face these moments where leaders make these impossible choices, operating in shades of gray, believing it's for the greater good.
It definitely forces you to question what you think you know, and face the idea that sometimes the biggest threats, the hardest truths, they come from within. So here's something to maybe leave you, the listener, thinking about building on all this. If secrets this big, moral compromises this deep, are made at the very top, supposedly to protect the Federation, what other truths might be hidden away? And what's the real price for individuals and for society of keeping them buried?